Welcome to another episode of the We Have a Meeting podcast. Today, we've got a proper grown-up, a proper career man, a man who knows a thing or two, and someone we're very, very excited to talk to. He's a senior clinical psychologist at Northamptonshire Healthcare. He's a man we've had the pleasure of meeting in our personal lives a few times, and someone who reached out to us and said he had some interesting takeaways for our audience. Today, we've got Craig Harris. Craig, how are you?
Yes, I'm really good, thanks. Thanks for having me. This is
Pleasure.
it's a really cool experience to do. I'm going to be honest and open. This is my first experience of doing a podcast, so I'm glad I could share it with you boys.
Likewise. Well, we always start these podcasts off the same way. So, who are you and what problem do you solve?
I am Craig. I am a clinical psychologist, and I work with children, young people, and adults who primarily have difficulties related to their physical health. I work in a service that supports children with chronic long-term health conditions such as diabetes, cystic fibrosis, sort of chronic regional pain, and all sorts of kind of health conditions that impact people's ability to live and go about their daily life. And in terms of what problems I solve, I suppose it's what problems I hope I can solve for people, which is I generally work with people to identify what's important to them. I look and try to understand the hurdles that might be presenting that get in the way of their ability to experience vitality, a sense of purpose, a sense of value in their lives, and find ways to help them either adjust to or I guess have a willingness to experience some of the feelings that are inevitable, and still head towards the things that they care about. So, and that's what I do. And whilst actually that's what I do in my kind of day job, I have a real curiosity and enthusiasm for, I guess, thinking about daily experiences of people and the challenges and barriers that we experience in day-to-day life, and whether that's in personal situations, relationships, or in our careers. And it's something that I'll be looking to develop, I guess, in the next few years in terms of my professional practice, to widen out the type of people that I'm sort of available to support.
And it's a big, broad question, but I imagine you'd have lots of interesting ways you can take this. What is the relationship between physical pain and the way we respond mentally?
So it is a really good question. I would almost flip the question to say, from a psychology perspective, it's a two-way relationship. So I'm really interested in the somatic presentation of psychological pain and distress. So, as I mentioned, I'm working with people who present with physical pain. Many of those have a physiological, organic cause for that pain that they're experiencing. What we also know is, from a psychological perspective, that internal psychological pain can also present itself physiologically. So thinking about stress and grief and loss and anger, all of those emotions, all of those internal experiences that we have, they also can present themselves physically. The body is connected to the mind intrinsically. And so a lot of kind of reading and research that I've been interested in the last few years is specifically around sort of functional presentations of pain, where there might not be a physiological cause for it. And so actually, I think the two things are intrinsically related. So when we're thinking about that relationship, I'm saying, actually, if we experience pain and distress, it is both physical and psychological. And actually, you can't just easily separate the two. And so, yeah, so thinking about the kind of psychological sort of experiences and how they present as pain, obviously also physical pain. It is a distraction. It is uncomfortable. It is something that is likely to draw your attention. It's something that you can quite easily become hooked and stuck and oriented towards. And we know that there are things that you can do. There are strategies which alter your experience of pain. That is, that pain only exists in your brain, in a sense. So pain is in your body. Pain is neurons firing from a particular area of your body to your brain. Your brain then processes that, and then that determines your experience of pain. But you will know that there are many, many examples of people being in states of pain that are able to do amazing and remarkable things. And so that is as evidence as any that actually there are many different things that you might consider being a barrier with pain that actually can be at times overcome. For example, when adrenaline is very high, you are less likely to experience the pain. You are more likely to experience it later as the mind and the body kind of regulates itself. It's evolutionary. It's something that's helped us survive for a very long time.
I had my next question, and then you've taken me down a path, Craig, where I want to go somewhere else. So I might come back to that. But the way that you were talking about pain there and how it might, in the moment with adrenaline, might not affect us, but it will have, like, me and Zach talk about this a lot, of the body keeps the score, and things can present in different ways. I guess for salespeople, predominantly, and kind of high targeted and kind of goal orientated people, one of the things is when they're running down a one-way path and they're really, like, I'm trying to explain this in the best way, but they're kind of working towards it, and it might be cold calling, rejection, failure, all of those different things, and all of these different things can lead to, like, a burnout, which I guess in a form is a kind of pain. So what is burnout and mindset and the relation to pain and kind of the psychology behind that?
Yeah, so you mentioned The Body Keeps the Score. It's actually the title of a book by Bessel van der Kolk, who obviously primarily writes about trauma in kind of early childhood and how that shapes, I think, the body's response to the world. It sort of creates a blueprint, and I think that book is a phenomenal piece of work that just, I think, still to this day has a huge impact on how we understand how experiences shape our later relationships and create a bit of a blueprint for those. In terms of talking about burnout, so burnout is something that I talk quite a lot about within chronic pain, and especially conditions and other conditions that require a lot of, I call it admin. So when we think about diabetes or cystic fibrosis, where there are daily expectations around managing insulin levels, where essentially you are taking on the responsibility for organs in the body that others typically wouldn't. All of the extra stress, all of the extra pressure, all of this extra kind of, whether it's rejection, whether it's kind of constant kind of setting of goals, you are putting your body into a state of distress, and you are triggering and utilizing your body's kind of parasympathetic nervous system. You are burning through energy. You are working really hard to maintain a state of doing, a state of activity, a state of continually kind of pushing yourself to do something. Inevitably, your battery is likely to run flat unless you are seeking out ways, unless you are finding activities or strategies or things to help recharge those batteries. Inevitably, at some point, those batteries are going to run flat. And so when I talk about burnout, I talk about actually getting to a point where you can no longer draw on those internal reserves to keep going. And there's lots of ways that I'll respond and support people with burnout, but inevitably it's a case of, okay, we need to take a step back, and we need to just for a moment try and work out what is it that's provoking this state of kind of almost running empty. You've got nothing left in your jug, and so how do you continue going at the same rate that you were before?
And what are the, so what is it? Is it the physical, the mental, predominantly from what you see? And what, for anybody listening that might be riding burnout, but they've also, the funny thing with burnout is it's hard because it's not like you've got a cold or whatever. It's not like your body, you just feel burnt out, but there's always work and families and kids to look after and whatever it is. And sometimes life doesn't stop. Reality keeps on spinning. So what can people be doing to kind of fix that burnout, or what are some quick fixes?
We all want a quick fix, right? We all want a magic wand that's just going to be waved and be like, there we go, job done. I don't know if there are quick fixes to that. I think it may be that some people can take a moment and are able to take a step back and almost take that helicopter view and just spend some time gaining some perspective. Now, you can do that individually. I'm not an advocate of everyone should see a psychologist, everyone should go to counselling, everyone should see a therapist. I'm very much an advocate for wouldn't it be lovely to live in a world that nobody needed to? So there are many things that you could do. There are self-help guides. There are kind of approaches that might allow you just, and often just relationships in your life. Some of the best therapists I've ever met have been my best friends, or people in my life that have given me a space to hear me and reflect on, or just notice and acknowledge what's happening. And so what I would recommend people doing is, first of all, just tuning in to what's happening. Where am I? How am I feeling? Like, where am I going? Does this feel like I'm on a treadmill? Does it feel like I'm really running empty at this point? And I think always the first step is developing that awareness, and just being mindful with a little m. I'm always cautious to talk about mindfulness with people, because a lot of people just kind of switch off at the point and can feel really turned off by the idea. But I would say mindfulness with a little m. Mindfulness is just being aware and being in the present and acknowledging where things are at. We all have inbuilt notices, and I think at times we can be so stuck in a state where we're just doing the same over and over again, and we're habitual creatures. And so if you find yourself kind of just running through the same circles, actually you've kind of got to just stop. And that doesn't mean that you stop going to work. It doesn't mean that you stop doing the things that you're doing, but you need to take a breath. You need to step back. You need to find a space where you're able to reflect on what's happening to you and inside of you, and reconnect with why you're doing it. And once you can start to find a little bit of a way of understanding that, it gives you so many more options. And no, it doesn't solve things immediately. And that's why I sort of hesitate to suggest that there's any kind of quick fix. What it allows you to do is give a perspective that you previously haven't had. Whilst you're on the treadmill, it's very difficult to actually pay attention to what's happening around you. You're so busy trying to keep up that you sort of lose sight of why you're doing it in the first place. And actually developing awareness, I think, is the first stage to being able to break the cycle. And that often is what therapy, from my perspective, is about. Noticing the cycle, then discovering ways that you might be able to break it. And the biggest way, the most important way that I've sort of looked at doing that is finding value, finding purpose, and helping someone to develop a compass as to actually, when you're in those periods or in those moments where you're feeling stuck, where you're feeling like the cycle is broken, you find some perspective and you're able to pull that compass out and go, okay, which way am I going to go next? In line with what's important to me.
I'm going to connect a through line here with a previous podcast it's not yet released as we're recording this, but we were talking about the word value and values. It's in a similar vein to when you were talking about mindfulness. It's one of those words that can almost have almost no weight to it anymore. It's overused, overdone. No one really knows what it means. So when you're talking about value or a set of values as a means of attaining happiness, what do you mean? How would you explain that?
I don't explain values as a way of attaining happiness. Generally, that's one of the first things, because what I would say is, in working towards your values, it is not always a happy experience. Often working towards values and what's important to you, you are likely to experience some suffering, some sadness, some grief. I often kind of think about, you think about love as a value. So if one of your values was to love and to be loving, It's not a goal. You're not just seeking it. You can't measure it. You can't count the number of people you love. Or you could, but it's unlikely to be particularly helpful. But if you were to choose that, decide that love is one of the values, and to be loving and to live a life that is loving, you have to be willing to experience the other side of that coin. So I will often create a two-sided coin in therapeutic work with people, where I'll say, okay, so what is loving? What might it look like if I were to follow you around with a documentary team, a sort of Louis Theroux style program, and I were to observe you for the next week, where you chose love and loving and being loving towards others as your value? What would that look like? What would you be doing first thing in the morning? What decisions would you be making? How would your relationship change? How would your work change? How would your decisions change when you're in Greg's grabbing a pasty? What difference would it make to your day-to-day life? And that's where you might develop goals. That's when you might be able to look at certain actions, certain behaviors that are measurable. And in order to step towards those values, in order to work towards that value, you are likely to experience some happiness, because like loving is really nice, isn't it? Because there's a really good chance that if you're loving towards others, that you might get some of that back. It's a reciprocal value. But to love also means you need to be willing to lose. You need to be willing to experience rejection. You need to be willing to experience loss. And so values, yeah, it may well provoke a sense of happiness, but actually the endeavor, the steps, the behaviors, the actions towards love will likely also provoke you to needing to experience other feelings too. And so the question I will ask is, once I've created those coins where on one side is love and that joy and that happiness and those smiles and those kisses and cuddles that you might experience in loving others, is say, well, on the other side, there is also some pain, there is also some loss, there is also some grief. And I will offer you that coin. I will say, are you willing to take that coin? Because if you really want love, then you're going to have to take this with it.
Wow.
And most people take the coin.
That's beautiful. I like the analogy. I think one thing that struck me there is, tell me if I'm wrong, and I've interpreted this wrong, but it's almost if the goal is a feeling, as in if I attain a state of being and it's an internal feeling, that's much better than me trying to attain an image. An image being I drive a fast car and live in a big house. The image being I have actually this is the way I feel in my body every day is much more attainable and much more, there's a lot more to grab onto.
Right. Absolutely. And I think when you think about goals, they are easily measurable, but they are also easily sort of failable. And I think that when you're approaching a goal, I guess I'll use the other metaphor. So another metaphor I really like is two boys in the back of a car on a family holiday going to Disney. And boy one, we'll call him Zach, is just so excited about getting to Disney. Oh, I can't wait till I get there. When I get there, I'm actually going to boss it. Like, I'm going to go on every single ride. I'm going to go on there. I'm going to be Mickey. I'm going to be Donald. I'm just going to high five like Iron Man. It's going to be amazing. I'm absolutely buzzing. Oh my God, when are we going to be there? When are we going to be there? Come on, let's just get there now. Like, this is taking for ages. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there? Are we there yet? And Zach in this story is really motivated about the goal. He really wants to get there. He really wants to get to that end point. And you can substitute Disney for the next new car. You can substitute Disney for a new house. You can substitute Disney for that extra zero in your pay packet. That is something you can be really excited and kind of desperate for. But Zach in that moment is so excited and so desperate to achieve and experience that feeling, that, as you talked about, that internal state of emotion. That's all he can think about. Jack in the back is thinking a little bit more like, I'm really looking forward to Disney. That's going to be really fun. Look at that lorry. It's the blue lorry. That's really cool. Hey, does anyone want to play a game? Can we count how many red and blue lorries there are? like let's and then he's looking out the window and he's noticing the trees, and he's seeing all of these kind of interesting cars and different kind of scenery going past, and then he's suggesting that you can, let's count the legs on the different animals on the pub names, and he's enjoying it. So and then when he gets to Disney, both of them get out and they're like, oh my god, we're in Disney, this is the best thing ever. When they get back in the car, Zach is, when are we going to be home? When can we go to Disney again? Oh, I can't wait to go there again. Oh my God, how much fun was it? It was great. And Jack is tired and he's remembering the experience that he's had at Disney and all the different things that he really enjoyed. But he's also kind of wanted to play more games. He's wanted to reflect with the family. He's wanted to play some jokes. He's wanted to put some music on the radio. And the difference in Zach and Jack's experience in those cars is one is so desperate and so oriented towards experiencing that end goal that you become so rigidly fixated on experiencing that you miss out on so much of the experience of the world, so much on the experience of being connected to others, of fun, of joy, of laughter. And Jack is doing all of that, and he gets the prize at the end. And so it's also a choice. So when I talk about mindfulness, again, with a little m, just to be careful, is about how can you engage with your experience? How can you acknowledge your internal experiences and try to actually connect with the world around you and what's happening, and not be so fixated and so rigidly stuck with a certain rule or expectation or goal.
You say it's a choice, Craig, but I'm sure that there are people in life that are more predisposed. And I know that it's not actually Zach and Jack in this situation, but for the story, we'll keep those names. If we were to cut Zach and Jack open, what might have happened in younger years or adult versions of Zach and Jack that might have happened throughout their teenage years that have got them to a point where some people are so end focused and some people are happy to live in the moment? What is it, a nature nurture thing? What do you think?
Yeah, typical psychologist response. Quite possibly a bit of both. And when I'm working with people, like I'm always keen to kind of explore those things, and often you will develop a narrative around, and we call it formulation within psychology, a kind of almost a hypothesis, if we're talking scientifically, a way of trying to make sense of how your early experiences might have shaped you to respond in a certain way, how your early experiences might have made you predisposed to being really goal oriented, predisposed to really desperately wanting the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. But also it's not just individual experience, because I also think we live in a society that is inherently very goal oriented, that is inherently very compare and despair. We live in a world that often kind of teaches us that we need to have the next best thing, and in internalizing some of those messages and narratives, we are again becoming oriented towards wanting the next best thing in life. Even as men, the expectation of how we should be, how we should act, it helps. We develop rules. So all of our life, we are exposed to experiences that provoke rules in us. I in my approach, kind of as a sort of developmental model of ACT, I use something called the DNAV approach, which stands for the discoverer, the noticer, the advisor, and values in the middle of it. That we all have a discoverer, and that discoverer is a part of ourselves that it basically is about behavior. And there's a spectrum of which we do the same things over and over again, but it's also the other end of the spectrum where we're willing to try new things, we're willing to take risks, we're willing to gamble. And depending on our life experiences, we are at different stages on that scale. The N is the noticer, so I've been talking about that kind of throughout, which is the internal part of us. We're all born as noticers, kind of as babies. We are just a little ball of noticer. All we're able to notice when we're hungry, when our caregiver's not there, when we're too hot, when we're too cold, when there's a light, when there's like something with really lovely contrast. We're just a little ball of noticer. So we all have that internal sense of being able to pay attention to what's happening inside us and what's happening around us. And the A stands for advisor. Now, the advisor is everything we've ever experienced. It's everything we've seen, everything we've heard, everything that has kind of we've been exposed to in our life. It's every time that someone has ever told us something. It's every time we've said something and someone else has responded to us. It is our sort of rule book for life. And within our advisor, and I ask people to sometimes just imagine it's like those films where you've got an angel and the devil on your shoulder, but it's not that. It's just one. It's just one advisor. Now that advisor will give us messages and will tell us rules like you need to do this or you're a failure, or don't let people down again today, or you need to, you must do this, or you just don't get out of bed, or get out of bed, today's another day, or it's everything, every internal experience, every internal voice or advice that you ever have. And so when we think about kind of whether people are predisposed to kind of acting in a certain way, I would say that we all have different advisors because we all have different experiences. And so that doesn't mean that you can't, like I said, break that cycle. Because if you are very fused with those advisor messages, that you are naturally just continuing that cycle. We talk about discoverer, where you're fused with those thoughts, you're fused with those internal beliefs that I have to do this, or I'm a failure, or I must do this, or people are looking at me, or people are talking about me. When we become fused with those thoughts, what it does is it inhibits our ability to act in different ways. There are always opportunities to step into our discoverer and try something new. And so when people seem to think, when we talk about Jack and Zach and cutting them through the middle, it's quite a dark metaphor for therapy, I suppose, isn't it? Kind of cutting someone through the middle. It's quite a quick way in, right? But generally, it's about trying to understand, okay, what are the motivators? And there are certain therapeutic approaches that will spend a huge amount of time allowing you to delve into and explore those experiences and try to make sense and make connections. And I would say there's value in that. And yet there are some people that are maybe less motivated to find out exactly why and spend lots and lots of time trying to explore what happened to them and why is that happening to them. And they'd rather actually just understand, okay, what are the rules that I learn, and what are the rules that I'm rigidly holding on to that are influencing how I act? And once you can notice what those rules are, you can spend some time discovering and practicing ways to recognize that those rules are just words, and words are meaningless until we give them meaning. And so rather than fighting them, or rather than on autopilot just agreeing with them and going on as normal as if nothing had changed, are we able to look at ourselves in context? And self as context basically just means taking a bird's eye view and saying, I am not my thoughts and I am not my feelings. Thoughts and feelings are like leaves on a stream, or thoughts and feelings are like clouds in the sky. They will come and go. And I would ask you to, just imagine the pink elephant exercise, where I'll tell you for the next 30 seconds to not think about the pink elephant. And what you'll discover is, over the next 30 seconds, there will be multiple experiences of that pink elephant jumping into your brain. So I support people to acknowledge you are not your thoughts and your feelings. You cannot control what thoughts and feelings arrive into your body. What you can do is choose what you do when they show up. And once you start choosing what to do when they show up, you start being able to discover that there are different things that you can do. And every time you do something different and you step into your discoverer, you start to learn that there are multiple ways of responding. And your advisor suddenly becomes this sort of wise advisor that's able to say, hey, well, actually, when you did this last time, there was a different outcome. It's not about ignoring feelings. And I think Stoicism can sometimes feel a little bit like that. And I know you boys have been talking about Stoicism on your podcast, and you're quite kind of advocates for it. And I think there are parts of Stoicism that I really like, but I would say in terms of my therapeutic approach, you need to make space for feelings. You need to be aware of them. You need to acknowledge, and you need to make room for them. Because ultimately, the more we push feelings away, the more we try to ignore them, the more we try to pretend they're not there or wrestle with them and argue with them. It's a bit like the kind of beach ball in the sea metaphor. We can push them down for as long as we like. But never
it's amazing, Craig, and you got there before I got there, because it was coming up to my next question. I think when we have very intellectual people on the podcast, there's a lot of, I'm always listening with a salesman's hat on, thinking, where could I use that? I thought the question, if we followed you with a camera crew and Louis through. So I thought that was a brilliant question that you could use in many different forms of sales discovery. I guess leaning on the stoicism thing, thinking of the advisor on the shoulder, me and Zach have a lot of conversations about this. Of there are many mornings at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, especially as winter approaches, where we don't feel like waking up early. We might not feel like the cold shower or going to the gym or whatever it is, but the voice will say, don't do that. That's dangerous. And then the advisor that we've now trained says, no, do it. And that is more of we take more stoic. It's not that we're not listening to our feelings. It's more of a stoic approach of like one of our favorite Marcus Aurelius quotes was, you weren't put on this planet to just stay in bed all day. Like you were here to work. So talk me through like that. You said there are elements of stoicism that you probably like. Talk me through that and probably pinpoint some of the stoic bits that you maybe fundamentally disagree with.
Now, that sort of relies on me having a really, really good and deep understanding of Stoicism. And I'm going to almost offer that disclaimer to say that I don't read a huge amount of philosophy, but my sort of amateur understanding and sort of shallow maybe understanding, I guess, of Stoicism is that it's an approach often that that all feelings should be sort of looked at with indifference, and I don't know if that's kind of general. Again, Stoicism is huge, isn't it? And there are obviously different kind of what we would call Stoic philosophers, but generally, if I start with kind of what I really like about Stoicism, so the one I remember from years ago was this kind of the metaphor about the archer.
We're talking the two arrows,
kind of the archer metaphor.
No,
but it might be about the arrow, so it may well be, but essentially, like the thing I like about Stoicism is like a good archer. An archer will do everything that he can to hit his target, and I would look at this as being like if an archer's values were achievement, it was development, it was learning, and it was growth, and that was an archer, and that was the archer's kind of values in life. So everything that Archer has done is about honing his craft, honing his art, honing his skills. And throughout doing that, he's got a sense of value in doing it. Now, as soon as that archer lets go of that arrow, as soon as he's kind of taken real acknowledgement of his surroundings, he's looked at kind of where he is, he's noticed how he's feeling, he's maybe got some control over his breathing, he's so present in the moment, he's so mindfully aware of what he's doing, until the moment he lets go of his arrow. And as soon as he lets go of that arrow, he is no longer in control or able to choose where that arrow goes. So a gust of wind could blow the arrow, or something could intercept it before it reaches the target. But that doesn't mean that he's not a good archer. That doesn't mean that he hasn't lived a life that is in line with what's been important with him. And so the outcome or the goal, if he was to set his sense of sort of goodness based on whether that arrow hits the target, then you can see that it's not a particularly helpful approach to life. And rather, if he chooses values as his compass, then actually he recognizes, this is what I can control and this is what I can't. And that whether that arrow hits the target or not, that doesn't define me. That doesn't define who I am. And so that, and I may have misunderstood it completely, but I think that's the element of kind of stoicism that I quite like, that you can't be blamed for something that's not within your control. And so the good archer aims for the target, but the target is not the goal. A good archer is one that does all he can to be a good archer. If your value in life is connection with others, if you do all you can to feel connected to others, you can't control those times where you might be rejected or somebody doesn't have the headspace for you. Every time you're a salesperson, if your value is to kind of succeed in work, to kind of put your energy and learn and develop skills, that and maybe actually one of your values might be about career progression, that's okay. That's absolutely a value, and it's about learning and growing and developing. You can't control if somebody's going to put the phone down on you. You can't control if somebody's going to let you speak for 3 minutes and then just kind of pull the rug from underneath you. And so in that moment, you are likely to feel a sense of sadness or rejection or even frustration or anger. But when those feelings arrive, rather than kind of responding to them on autopilot, treat them like a text message. You read them and you notice them, but you don't need to reply or act. You can take that moment to breathe, notice where you are, what you're doing, and again, pull out that compass. Your lovely example about lying in the bed in the morning, I think, again, like you said in that podcast, it's something that everyone experiences. At some point in their life, you will have that internal dilemma of, get up. It's, I should get up because I've got work. And then there's another part of your advisor. I sometimes thought, rather than just one advisor, I might sort of imagine you've got passengers on your bus. You are the driver of your bus, and you're driving to in the general direction that you want to go, and in that direction it's north. And every time you keep moving in that direction, you're moving kind of the way you want to go. And at different points, you'll stop off at different stops, and you pick up new advisors, and you pick up new messages and new beliefs about the world, about yourself, and about other people. And every time that a decision comes about, every time there's an option or a fork in the road, those passengers will rear up on their seats and they will shout at you and they will tell you what you should be doing. And there are times that as humans, it's completely natural that we listen to those advisors. We listen to those kind of angry passengers. We listen to those passengers saying, "You're not good enough. Give up. There's no point. You're going to embarrass yourself. This is awful. It's not worth it." And really, the only way to shut them up is to do what they're telling you to do. And we do it. And temporarily, we get a sense of relief because those voices have quietened down. They've gone back to their seats. But inevitably, what happens a few moments later? They're back out of their seats again. They're saying, "I can't believe you did that. You've let yourself down. You absolute failure. You're weak. You're nothing. What a waste of space." And actually, the other alternative is you spend your time arguing with them. Okay, so you stop the bus and you turn around, "Just shut up, just leave me alone, right? Just leave it up, just I've had enough of this." Okay. And whilst you're doing that, you're not able to pay attention to where you're going. You're a bit like Zach in the back of that car. You're not being able to orientate yourself to the other things in life that are happening around you. You're not able to talk to your family. You're not able to enjoy love, connection, value, purpose. So fighting them doesn't really work. Arguing with your thoughts and using the kind of court of a defense and prosecution, because it takes so much energy, it's not helpful. Neither is it particularly helpful in the long term to listen to them and allow them to control what you're doing. So the third option is to notice that they're there. So in that morning where you're struggling to get out of bed and you notice those advisor thoughts that just stay in bed. Just stay in bed. Oh, you feel rubbish. Just another half an hour. It's so comfy. It's so, it's so warm. You can say, "Yeah, no, it is comfy and warm. And I really like it here. And you know what? It would be really nice to stay in bed. Thank you, brain." It's a bit twee and it's a bit kind of cheesy, but I will often kind of provoke people to do that, to kind of experience that in the room, that internal dilemma. And I'll say, just thank your brain, because your advisor is the thing that's kept you alive up until now. Okay, we all have an advisor because its job is primarily survival. And you come from a long line of people with really good advisors. Because if your great grandparents didn't have a good advisor, you wouldn't be here today. So let's be kind to it. Let's thank our brain and say, "Hey, thanks for your advice, mate. But right now, I'm going to pull out my compass or my sat nav if you're not on the bus, and I'm going to go in this direction." And in that moment, you take a deep breath. You remember that these thoughts are just words and they're just language and they are just rules, and you don't need to take them with any sort of seriously. You can take them with a pinch of salt, and maybe, like a Stoic would say, treat them with indifference, but I would say just treat them, just not with reverence, and take the action that moves you towards what you care about. It's a choice point, right? You can either in that moment step towards what's important to you, or take a decision that takes you away from it. And that's your right in that moment.
It reminds me, Craig, of I'm sure it's a technique that's called something totally different in psychology and therapy, but we use a technique where if we're on a sales call and someone sounds particularly emotional, they've really kind of vented at us for a while, rather than jumping into, let me try and help you solve that problem. If you take a minute to say, that sounds like a really vulnerable spot, or that feels really frustrating, there's a moment of the shoulders come down a bit and there's a feeling of being heard first. And it sounds like what you're saying is almost do that to yourself. So tell yourself, like, oh, it sounds like you're frustrated, it sounds like you want to stay in bed today, and that's fine, but we can't really do that right now.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I don't. What do you call it in sales speak? Has that got a name?
Labeling.
Labeling. Okay. Yeah. Well, labeling is absolutely a term that we'll talk about in. I'll use it quite a lot in therapy, but also in sort of supporting parents with their children, kind of labeling emotions. I mean, I would argue also that it's being empathic. You are showing empathy towards someone's experience. You are also accepting. So often in my sort of parent support and kind of helping them to navigate children's big feelings, we'll often talk about using A&E. So this is a Dan Hughes model, which uses the acronym PLACE, which is playfulness, love, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And in that moment, when you're faced with big feelings and big emotions, you can go straight to A&E. And I always like to hold that because it's just an easy to remember acronym. And you just hit them with acceptance and empathy. Like, I hear you, and I'm going to allow that feeling to be here. And I'm not going to push it away, and I'm not going to tell you that you don't feel that way. But I hear you, and I'm sorry you feel like that, because that sounds really hard. And like you said, it completely, and doesn't always, some people are sometimes so dysregulated that it doesn't quite get through, and they just need some time to self-regulate. But it's a really helpful way of connecting with someone. And yeah, like you said, the shoulders come down, the kind of the defenses might just reduce slightly, and suddenly you're connecting with another human. So yeah, labeling, I like that, but A&E is also one of my favorite ways to kind of describe that kind of process. It also reminds me of something I heard. It's another term that kind of, or a sort of phenomena that we describe, called attunement, and it comes from sort of attachment psychology, where you're able to meet someone where they're at, where you're able to sort of dance the dance of emotions. So attunement is about being fully connected to someone's experience, and actually maybe, and the other thing I guess I'd sort of put in there is affect matching. So I don't know if you've ever been on the phone to kind of a customer services, and you're really pissed off because the thing that you paid a lot of money for isn't working how it should, and you're now onto the third or fourth kind of layer up the ladder of hierarchy. Let me just get my manager. Let me just get my manager. And this person comes on the phone to you, and you're fuming. You're really just fed up. You're just really annoyed by this point. You're like, whoa, why won't someone just like help me, sort me out? Like, I just want someone to take me seriously right now. And someone answers the phone and say, hello, what seems to be your problem? And you think, what? No, don't hit me with that, because like, you're the third person I've been spoken to at this point, and that is so out of line with where I'm feeling right now. And I would ask you to think back to your experiences of whether you've been able to connect with somebody on the other end of the line who's able to go, oh, okay, wow, yeah, that sounds really rough. And they've kind of affect matched. So they've kind of matched your energy, and they've not matched your emotions. And they're not like, yeah, oh my God, I'm angry too. I'm fuming. How dare this happen to you? But they match your energy. And they're able to kind of meet you where you're at and be like, wow, okay, yeah. It sounds like a nightmare. No surprise that you're feeling like this. Look, what is it I can do to help? And again, immediately, your defenses are down. You've got somebody who is able to attune with you. Somebody is able to kind of seems to get where you're at. And it takes the kind of sting out of what you're feeling right there and then. And you no longer need to prove yourself as to how angry and pissed off you are, because they get it. They've heard you. And without even saying it, you've almost got somebody who understands. And so that's another thing I would say, kind of, and I wonder whether that's something that's used within sales as, or an effective technique when you're met with somebody who seems like they're on a different level. Because the beautiful thing about affect matching is, I know, Zach, you've got children. When you're met with a really excitable, energetic, loud, cross child, actually going at them with the calm storytelling voice often doesn't really help. Okay, they're not hearing you, you're not on their level. So the best thing you could do is meet them where they're at. And when you meet them where you're at, it's like dancing the tango. So there's no point them doing the American smooth and you rocking up doing the kind of a sort of what's it called? I was going to say Viennese. I think that's an ice cream.
Waltz.
The waltz. But you've got to match them. So you'd be like, okay, I'm going to tango with you for a couple of minutes. But once you're tangoing, it's far easier for you to take the lead. So if you're meeting with someone on the phone, whether you're meeting someone in person or it's a child in your living room who doesn't really want to go to bed, you've got to meet them where they're at. And only when you meet them where you're at, you can hold their hands and you can guide them back down again. And so I use that all the time with parenting, because I just think, actually, if the battle is trying to get you to get you where I'm at, then I'm really going to need to meet you where you are and give you that experience of coming down together, and we're connected.
I think it's been amazing so far. But we're almost at time, and there's a few little quick fire things I want to get out of you. So whenever we have someone on with your credentials, it's a big, vague thing. Take it as you will. What is your favorite question to ask someone?
What is my favorite question? Oh, that's a big question. Oh, if only you'd give me an opportunity to prepare beforehand. Okay, I really like the kind of the no fear question. So I'll often ask people, and it's quite a good conversation over a beer as well. If you woke up tomorrow and, you know what, I'll reword it. So there's two versions of this question. There's one that I might use more often in therapy when I'm kind of meeting for someone the first time, and I'll give you that one first. So it's more of the miracle question. And it's, okay, we've just met, but I'm going to ask you to imagine something for a moment, and I just want you to go with it, okay? I want you to imagine that tonight you go home and something happens, a miracle. Something has changed, something different, maybe quite small, maybe quite big, but tomorrow morning you wake up and nobody told you that the miracle has happened, but it has. What would you notice? What would be different? How would those interactions be different? And I would sometimes swap out the miracle with what would a life be like with no fear. So if you could go about tomorrow with no fear, with the ability to act with courage, with bravery, with resilience, what would be different? What decisions would you make that would be different to the decisions you made yesterday? What would that life look like? And often just by asking that question, I find that people can come up with some really remarkable answers, and you discover a bit more about people than you would if you were to ask them what the problem is.
I think that's
maybe
superb.
that would work maybe that would work in sales too.
Yeah,
Let's say I was a sales magician, right? Let's say I waved that magic sales wand and all your problems have been solved. What would be different about your day? And then that's your starting point of saying, well, let me see how I can help you.
I think the no fear one's a great one. We lean on we call it a desired future state, which is like if we were to work together for 6 to 12 months, how would you know it was working? So it's less like fluffy, but then we often lean on like a limiting belief style of questioning, which is kind of saying, why can't you do that yourself? So I think what you've just said fits in quite nicely, because if it's a case of I'm scared of rejection, of doing the job or of doing what it takes, I'm scared if it doesn't work, well, what would you do if you had no fear, is probably quite a good question to ask someone. Because if someone leaves that interaction, they think, well, I can just do this myself, and that's just as good as taking lots of money off them. You know?
It does sort of reverse engineer what the problem is, and I often find it's a more strength-based approach to kind of how you navigate life. So let's say that there were no barriers, and then you start to discover maybe what those barriers might be.
Yeah. And last thing I wanted to ask you, can you persuade people, or do they have to persuade themselves?
I think there's a bit of both involved. So I think some people, when it comes to therapy, there needs to be a willingness. When it comes to general life, I suppose there probably also needs to be a willingness too. We as humans, I think, have the ability to persuade people. I think sometimes we can do it quite implicitly rather than really explicitly. So again, I'm just going to talk about, I suppose, my experience in terms of where I'm a little bit more kind of knowledgeable, which is, can I persuade someone to engage in therapy if they don't want to? Probably not. But I would say some of the persuasion will come from an experience of coming somewhere and being listened to, and someone saying to you, okay, it doesn't sound like you're ready to do this right now. And that's okay. I'm not going to push you. What I would also say is, where I have made mistakes in my practice, where I have at times tried to persuade people and had to work really, really hard to try and get people to keep coming back, and usually because I can see that there is possibility or opportunity for change, the outcomes are never as good. When you make changes for other people and aren't able to make the transition to making changes for yourself, for what's important to you, it's not sustainable. So I might look at trying to get someone to just come back again and say, can we give this another go? Would you come back again? Would you come back and talk to me? But if in that time we can't start to make some shifts to discovering what might maintain that motivation and enthusiasm in the long term, then it's okay to say, okay, I'm not going to pull you to do that right now, because from my position, you might come back in the future, and I want you to know that I've respected you and that I'm ready for when you are. So can people be persuaded? Maybe a little bit, but it's not sustainable in the long term. If you can get them over the line in that first few moments, then great. But otherwise, they need to find their own willingness.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Craig. I've really enjoyed this. I feel like it could have gone in many other directions. Sadly, time is a limiting factor. So
Thank you so much, Craig.
Again, if you would be so kind.
I'd love to come back. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Been great, Craig. Thank you.
Take care, guys.